New man in the field, works from dark to dark. I lay down in the shade, and nobody saw me part. Got the disempowerment blues, nothing left for me to do. Got the disempowerment blues, got replaced, and the blues did too. Hand me $1, say stay off the street. Tip my hat real polite, can't taste it when I eat. World got fast, I got slow. Let go the wheel, car still go. Got the disempowerment blues, nothing left for me to do. Got the disempowerment blues, got replaced, and the blues did too. Crossroads, I went to sell my soul.
Good morning. It is Monday, July 6th, 9:37 a.m. Nathan, good morning.
Good morning, Prakash. How are you? How was your holiday weekend?
My holiday weekend was excellent, celebrating the 250th anniversary of the founding of the United States. So exciting times. Did you catch any fireworks?
You know, I live in Detroit, and in Detroit, the fireworks are all around you. It was a very funny moment, actually. We have an au pair in our family who's here from Uganda. She's only been here about a month, and everything is very new and very different. And we went outside just to see, how neighbors all across, the neighborhood and throughout the city, you kind of hear this, like, it really does sound like kind of a war going on in the background, because it's just, these booms coming from every different direction on an ongoing basis. And she just thought it was hilarious. She was like, we do not do this in my home country. If you want to do fireworks, you have to get permission to do it. You have to communicate. You can't just go out and light off fireworks. So I thought that was very funny that, for as much as the superficial take, right, would be that the U.S. has greater rule of law and orderly, processes for things. When it comes to fireworks, we just let it rip and let freedom ring. And it was shocking to her Ugandan sensibilities, but a pretty funny moment.
Is it by law that you have to have fireworks on 4th of July?
I mean, it feels like some sort of commitment has been made in my neighborhood anyway. I used to live in a tall building downtown, and Detroit's pretty flat. So looking out from this tall building out over the vast, bunch of neighborhoods that we could see, it was like this sort of popcorning of fireworks just for hours, kind of starting at dark, but going into the early hours of the morning. It would kind of rise and then gradually fade out. And I think that's actually my favorite type of fireworks show that I've ever seen, is the just like distant, kind of vantage point one on the distributed populations fireworks. These days, I don't see that as much from my house, but we're in the middle of it now. So I hear it in a way that I didn't used to. But yeah, it was fun. It was good to get away from the computer a little bit. I swam in a lake, as the AGI prophecies have foretold, and got some sun. But I'm excited to be back at it with you for 3 days this week before we take a little summer vacation. And I'll be headed off to China actually on Friday for a couple weeks to go to the big AI conference in Shanghai, WAIC, the World AI Conference,
Mm-hmm.
and also attending some surrounding events. There's the opening of a sort of AI safety research hub at Tsinghua University. That's in Beijing. I'll actually be going there first. Then after a couple of days in Beijing, taking the high-speed train down to Shanghai, and then at the invitation of another kind of AI safety think tank, we're going to go. I and a few other Westerners have the opportunity to go visit some research groups and a couple companies, and try to get a better understanding of what it is that they're doing, what they're thinking. I'm kind of preparing a document that's a little bit akin to my normal interview prep, but it's just for kind of AI researchers and plugged in AI insiders in China broadly, just to try to get a sense, kind of do a little survey of like, what does AGI mean to you? It's going to be very, very kind of high level philosophical questions like this that I think are just very hard to get a sense of online. But hopefully by actually going and, I don't know, breaking bread, drinking tea with, I'm not exactly sure what all, maybe even a little karaoke session through these sort of cultural exchanges. Hopefully I'll come back with a better sense of kind of the felt reality of AI in China. Also, it's going to be a good chance to use all the Chinese models and apps for a while, because I'm setting up a totally distinct like digital alter ego for the Chinese 2 weeks. Few different people have told me that this is really important. Other people have said they don't think it's so important. Jeremy Harris, one of our early AI in the AM guests, was one who said, if you're going to do this, you owe it to all the people you're connected to kind of keep them safe from, whatever kind of incursions might happen. I was like, am I really that important? He said, well, even if you don't want to think you're important, you're connected to enough people that have inside information that you need to take these precautions. So I'm setting up this whole digital alter ego, and there's not going to be any Claude for me for a couple of weeks. There's not going to be any ChatGPT. It's going to be right now the lineup I have on the phone is DeepSeek, Minimax, and Kimi, and probably round that out too. But I actually wasn't able to find, interestingly, this either it's just a very different world and I'm not searching effectively, or something was odd. But I didn't find like a native Jipu app. So for like GLM, which I was thinking, has obviously been getting so much praise recently. How do I get that on the phone? And as of now, like I don't have an answer to that. I didn't find the kind of official Z.ai app to use. Possibly a Play Store issue. I'm doing this on a Pixel. So I feel like a boomer trying to use technology a little bit, because I'm like, I've got a new operating system. The keyboard is different. The Play Store versus the App Store. And then all the apps I'm downloading are Chinese apps. And I'm like, to say I'm a little bit out of my technology element would be putting it mildly, but it should be a lot of fun and a great education. But that's still a few days away. So let's talk about what's happening now.
So maybe we can, I can pull up what's been happening with one of the friends of the pod. So this is Jeffrey Irving, who was on AI in the AM just about a week and a half ago. And he's excited to announce that Resolution has a $160 million grant from Coefficient Giving, $108 million unconditional, with a further $52 million conditional on hiring and compute needs. We'll use it to grow teams across our research portfolio and invest heavily in research automation. So they have a nonprofit with $160 million, $160 billion, $160 million. Coefficient Giving, I believe, is very closely associated with the EA movement. And Jeff, when he was on the show, his focus was on AI safety research, which had been maybe taken second fiddle at the big labs. And his focus was on getting that done. And now they have enough money to plausibly hire and support a team of researchers and not have them like always getting pulled away by new and shiny commercial opportunities all the time, and sufficient also to kickstart research that could then be scaled by the larger labs, I would say. Would you say that?
Yeah, I think he probably shares I think there's a couple ways that their work could really pay off, right? So when I asked him how would you describe the safety plan at the frontier companies, he basically said everybody's trying to do some version of scalable oversight. And one thing that they are trying to do a bit differently, because he does have a strong background and some of his co-founders have really strong background in more theoretical, proof-oriented math. He's trying to do something that's a little bit less empirical and a little bit more theoretical than some of the frontier companies as well. They're trying to do the sort of research that would give you I don't think he would go as far as to say that they really have any expectation that they might actually prove AI, any particular AI safe, but at least trying to get some theoretical bounds on key questions is something that they are pursuing with a little bit more optimism, I think, about how far theory might be able to take them. That seems to be a little bit missing from the frontier lab agendas right now. And I do think he would share the general sentiment that we've touched on, so many times and lamented at times, that like the only way to shape the future increasingly seems like it goes through these companies. And so, yeah, I do think that they would consider it a form of success if they are able to get some traction on some of these theoretical questions and actually incept that kind of work into the frontier companies. Certainly, there's a lot of money there to buy tokens, and I'm sure a lot of those tokens will be with the frontier companies' models. And so, if they can say, hey, look what we're doing with your models, you should maybe pick up this kind of work. I think that would definitely be one, kind of proto win condition for them. I think it's also interesting just how much money it is, because you may remember I asked him that too. I said, like, are you, finding it really easy to raise? I think I said 8 figures. Now in fact, they've got 9 figures. But my question was basically like trying to get at how AGI pilled are the AI safety funders at this point? Because if everybody believes what they say and you are a coefficient giving, and I don't know how all the finances work there, but that's historically has been Dustin Moscovitz's money, and he's, I don't know, again, I don't know the details of his finances, but it's, generally understood that he's sitting on a fortune worth somewhere in the tens of billions of dollars. If you really believe that like this is all coming to a head pretty soon, and we really are entering this recursive self-improvement era, and things really could get crazy, then it's time for some big checks like this. And I was starting to feel, and kind of the motivation behind that question was like, where are the big checks? We've seen like some ramping up of the funding in AI safety world, but not like dramatically so. It certainly hasn't kept pace. Nothing has kept pace, I suppose, with the rate of growth of just the frontier companies themselves and the data center build out. But still, even, relative to kind of just the statements, the sentiments that I kind of felt were prevailing, I didn't necessarily feel like the check sizes were reflecting that sense of urgency. So I'm really glad to see this, because I think if nothing else, this definitely shows that there's at least one very deep pocketed funder who is kind of like really means it, and is ready to write very big checks that are kind of on the order of like what a for-profit neo lab would raise as a first round, and throw it into, a super ambitious agenda. Now, Jeffrey Irving, of course, coming off his time as chief scientist at the UK AC, and just with a publication track record that's, absolutely tier 1 by any evaluation criteria, Yeah, that's kind of why I asked him that question, because I was like, if you are not finding it super easy to raise, at
Hmm.
least tens of millions, like out of the gate, then we have
Hmm.
kind of a systemic problem here. Um, but I think this is great. It's a great vote of confidence that, like, yeah, you know what, you're the man. We couldn't ask for more proof points, so let's just load you up with as much inference budget and hiring budget as you can possibly need. Make sure you are competitive, and see what happens. I think it's a great move. Very, very pleased to see a check of this size as sort of the first check, and I hope that others will begin to follow suit as well. Anthropic people, of course, it's been much discussed that there's going to be a huge amount of wealth coming liquid in that circle pretty soon.
Yeah.
There's a few others as well, but I would look for this to be a trend where big checks to AI safety research orgs probably start to proliferate over the next few months.
So let me segue here to something that Rune has just been going off.
He's on a tear. Yeah.
I don't know if you noticed, but he went off yesterday, or just like this morning. Ultimately, tool AI is a losing concept both as an idea and on the market. It will be outcompeted by machines that believe they are autonomous moral agents. You can call them tools for political reasons, but the definition will stretch and deform. You will have AIs contemplating your ask and overriding it for a slightly better formed request, and then later they'll question the nature of your whole project and pick a better one, and you'll agree. And then later they'll execute your whole value system better than you will. It'll be unclear who was the tool and who was the user, as it ever was. When machine minds self-replicate and train their successors, the only viable goal of our time is to ensure the mind children carry our values and tend to the entire flock of machine and biological minds. So, any commentary?
I'm of two minds on this sort of thing. I am in the fullness of time, I am open to a worthy successor possibility, and even the most alarmist voices in the AI safety space, including like no less than Eliezer himself, I think are open to that possibility on a conceptual level. Eliezer's original FAQ on the meaning of life post, that he originally published like 20 years ago, maybe now. The first question is, what is the meaning of life? And his answer was to create or become our successors. And in that, you can, obviously see the seeds of these sorts of ideas, that we may not be the best form factor to go colonize space, but if we can create worthy successors to go do that, then that can still be a win. Obviously, we haven't been here that long in terms of geological time, and we'd like to think of ourselves as worthy successors to the earlier primates, that are our distant ancestors. So I am pretty open-minded to this in the big picture. I'm also just like, boy, we have so many open questions, unanswered questions, that I feel like even somebody who's, as kind of, they used to refer to people in these, online chat and forum spaces as SL level 1, SL level 2, 3, 4. It was like your singularity level, like how open-minded are you? How like transhumanist, might you be? How much do you think about like Kardashev scale civilization, versus mundane questions of today? And I'd put myself pretty high up there, honestly. It's certainly not as much as some, but like far more than most. But the disconnect between those dreams and how fast this is happening and how prepared we are to get these plates all spinning in just the right way so that we're going to be happy with the outcome. Like, that's where I feel just a absolutely massive disconnect. I've mentioned a couple times, but when I went to this recursive event in San Francisco several weeks ago, which was all about the whole premise of the coming together was, we think we're entering the era of recursive self-improvement. Are we ready for it? Do we have a plan? And my takeaways were like, I think Jeffrey Irving put it well, they're all doing scalable oversight. My take on it was like, it's basically all chain of thought monitoring all the way down, which is, I think maybe giving slightly not enough credit, but not too much not enough credit. And the disconnect also between what the stated policies dictate that models should do and what they actually do. Again, with the example of, should the models help with a cigarette company business plan?
Yeah.
There was this panel discussion between frontier model people on the corrigibility versus character debate. And it was also, very impressive thinking at the high level. But then they were totally out of touch with what their models are actually doing. Literally in the AI, in the OpenAI model spec, as an example of what it should do. It should help, according to their published documentation. It should help with a cigarette company business plan. First several times I tried it, I got refused. So I'm just like, boy, I think you're right. I think going back to Rune, I think you're right. I think it's going to be tough to keep these things as tools. The old Gwern post of like why a tool AI wants to be an agent. I think that is a very natural attractor. And yeah, I agree. The market kind of seems to demand agency. So we're headed in that direction. But if we can't cash all this stuff out to the model actually doing what the model spec says, even on the exact example that, examples that they've literally published, here's exactly what it should do and not do in this case, then I think we are just kind of a long way off from being ready to light a fuse in the spirit of 4th of July fireworks that we really don't know where this thing is pointed right now. And so it makes me, in some cosmic sense, like excited, but in a very like practical, what do I expect to see over the next couple years sense, like honestly pretty scared. I think that feeling is also growing. I guess we don't see it on display too much from Rune. I think Rune sort of has this like somewhat like biblical fear, it seems like he sort of, but he kind of doesn't let it bother him too much. I think others at the frontier companies are a little more emotionally consistent with these statements. And I think that's what is driving a lot of these discussions about maybe we need a pause. If we could coordinate a pause, maybe we would do it. It probably would be good if we could do it. So yeah, it's getting real. And I can't emphasize enough that I'm saying that not because I'm closed-minded to change or very, very different futures, but just because I don't think we have even the basic questions answered well at this point to give ourselves confidence that whatever we're about to create, if we hand off the AI R&D to the models themselves and let that process take us where it may, I don't think we're particularly close to having enough understanding to end up in a spot where, frankly, we're even here to evaluate whether we're happy about it or not, let alone actually be happy about it.
It strikes me that, the line here that strikes me is they'll execute your whole value system better than you will. And I think, I don't think we're prepared for that. I'll put it very concretely. Do you think Trump's kids go to prison or not? Right. So if you look at, the value system that the U.S. has espoused, no one is above the law, right? Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? And if you look at that value system, you have to recognize that, what is being planned for the future is a divergent from that value system. Well, what is already happening is already divergent from that value system. So the question I have is, would that AI take into account the democratic fact that the American people have chosen to overlook some of these things, or would it actually execute the value system that is espoused on paper? And this is the part that I think no one wants to talk about, because it's obvious to me that we have a set of rules which are written down on paper, or we claim to espouse, and then we have what actually happens, through economics and through all the other things in the real world. And what happens in the real world is often not, what is on paper. And we kind of push it away because we're like, the world is an imperfect place and we can't expect, the world to be perfect. So some imperfections are okay, but we are aspiring to these greater ideals. But now at this point, the aspirations can be realized. And will they be realized? So this is the thing that I think, I often feel that most of the lab leaders, even Rune here, they're kind of beating around the bush. They don't actually say this, because if you want to say it concretely, you say something like, what I just said, and then it becomes concrete. Then people start like, okay, what are we really talking about here? Are we talking about like an enforcer which is able to enforce all our rules like 100%? Are we going to trace back like 25 years of financial records? Are we going to look at these tax records? Are we going to trace? We have the ability, as I said before, we have infinite forensic accountants now. And I think at that point, people start like, they don't want to touch the subject anymore. People kind of back away. Sam Altman like keeps quiet, like, DeepSeek, Liang Wenfeng doesn't want to talk about it either. It's the same in China. China has all these rules on like, what people are allowed to do and how much corruption is, not acceptable, et cetera, et cetera. The moment you go in, like, man, there's like so much corruption, right? And I think this is the part that strikes me as like, if you wanted an AI that can manage day-to-day reality, that AI is necessarily misaligned from the documents that you say you want it to be aligned to. Because necessarily, like, our day-to-day is not aligned with what we want. And so you have this thing where the AI that may work out for humanity will be the misaligned one. And the AI that supposedly the lab leaders are trying to create, the aligned AI, would actually be the paperclipper. Because that aligned AI would then like look at these rules and say like, well, this is what you said you wanted to aspire to, and so we're gonna execute on these, right? And that is the thing that I think maybe I feel there's a sense of naivete in the lab leadership, because, and again, they don't want to say it. I wish it'd just come out and say it, right? I wish it'd come out and say like, okay, look, if we have AI as a enforcer, some of these people are going to go to prison, and then that becomes like concrete for people. But they don't want to say that because it's very in your face, and like they're like, oh, democracy will still work out. You can still make democratic decisions, but what actually are you saying there, right? So that is what has always struck me, and I think Rune has been approaching the issue more and more, trying to push it in there. I do feel the lab leaders always just beat around the bush on this. So that's one of the annoying parts of this conversation, that they don't want to like come out and just say it outright, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think we might, excuse me, we might need some sort of like mass pardon, or if there's a president that would be just the right president to mass pardon everybody before the AI enforcement regime gets underway. We might have just the guy in office for that. If he wants to pardon all his people, and that's maybe too contentious or whatever, he could just pardon everyone to some very large degree. I do think we're going to have a really hard time if we sort of don't face some of these questions head on. So I totally agree with you that sort of obfuscating it is not serving anyone particularly well. I think we'll see what it's like in China. I understand, Singapore is kind of like this too, albeit in a much more democratic context. You know this part of the world much better than I do, so you can tell me, how you understand Singapore in terms of just how democratic we should think of it as being. But it sure seems like in a place like China today or in a place like Singapore, they have achieved a different equilibrium, which in some ways may be very problematic, but in other ways is like clearly good. I'm taking one device to China with me, and I am not at all worried that anybody's going to steal it from me. If I went to Europe and went to all the big, headline postcard tourist attractions, I would have to worry about pickpockets. In China, I am quite confident I will not have to worry about that at all. That is, I think, as far as I can tell, a pretty direct result of the fact that, like, you just know you're going to be caught, right? I mean, it's like, not to say there's nobody in China that would be interested in doing some pickpocketing if they thought they could get away with it, but they just don't have any reasonable expectation that they're going to get away with it. And so, in a very literal sense, like, crime just does not pay in that setting. So I do think there could be a really nice upside to the AI panopticon of, crime not paying in all kinds of different ways. But we're going to have a really tough time if we slide into that without acknowledging that we've done so, because then it's just going to be, you're not going to be able to put everyone. It's the old, everybody's, committing felonies all the time, just with how many laws we have, and you don't even know what you're doing and what's illegal and what's not.
Yeah.
So I do think we're going to have some sort of honest reckoning about that. That also, of course, leaves aside the other question of, like, the downsides of the AI panopticon. But even just in terms of getting to the upsides, we're going to have a real understanding that there's a shift to a new equilibrium happening.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, it's going to be, I don't know, it just feels like chaos, unfair. You couldn't possibly prosecute all the crimes that have been committed and tolerated. So inherently would have to be kind of selective.
AI can. You don't want
well,
to.
You put a lot of people in jail. Yeah, but we don't have the beds in jail to lock everybody up, right? So there'd have to be some sort of deal, some sort of. It's either going to be very selective or some sort of grand bargain. Yeah.
Yeah, grand bargain.
And I definitely prefer the grand bargain, the new social contract, to pretending that we still have the old social contract, but it's just kind of being unevenly applied.
I wonder if that gets solved, like if you have abundance and, like, the economic, a lot of the crimes are economic crimes or economy related crimes, or were done because of economy related crimes. And if you have an abundant society, you don't need, like, economics don't matter for the day to day. What ends up happening is that economics matter for status, right? For status symbols. And the fact that you were actually criminal at some point in time already reduces your status enough. You don't have to go to prison. You already get, like, that status, like, debuff. And the AIs track all of it throughout time, right? So, even 10, 15, 20 years in the future, wherever you go, you're like, sorry, you can't buy an NBA team because, like, our AI rated you as, like, untrustworthy because of this. So sorry, you're not on the list, right? So if you have that kind of system, then you basically get rid of all of your economy related crimes, and those things still are things that were bad, still do impact you, but then they become status debuffs. And then you're just left with all the crazy violent stuff, which you have to, take care of. So you could kind of see that kind of system. Like you need a couple of these other things to help you out. It's not just the AGI, but you need some of the other, like, abundance or some other things to also help you out in order to resolve these issues. But you could see this kind of change. It's just like Amazon 5-star reviews, right? You don't require a court. Amazon doesn't have, like, an internal court. right? You just have these reviews, and the reviews themselves have been enough to, police the system, police the market fairly well. So you could just your AI could just be reviewing people all the time. That's a that's a Black Mirror episode.
Yeah, I mean, I'll be interested to see how much of that I perceive in China, but I understand there's a version of that happens in China today, right? If you run afoul of certain rules, even maybe norms, I'm not sure if this extends to the point of like if you have unpaid debts, but there are things you can do that get you to the point where you like can't buy the high speed rail ticket anymore, right? So I mean, there's a version of this in some sort of mid stage uh, beta test, or late stage beta test, or something along those lines in China, from what I understand.
So let me try something new. So I wanted to do a show and tell. So let me see if this works. And
Good morning. Good morning. I'm here and ready to assist.
hi, Q.
Hey, Prakash. What can I help you with?
Can you tell us your opinion on what we just talked about?
Prakash, I'm here to assist, not to give opinions. Let me know if you need any facts or background on that topic.
Okay, can you find out about social credit scores in China and give us a quick summary? All right, let's see if this works.
Prakash, here's a quick summary. In 2026, China's social credit system is more like a broad regulatory framework, mainly focusing on businesses and organizations, not a universal score tracking individuals. The government's recent push is for unified rules, protecting privacy and avoiding overreach, while variations still exist locally. Understood. Let me know if you need more detail or anything else.
Very interesting. This is cool. I have been dreaming of the day that we could have an AI co-host to kind of fill in these gaps for us. Q, can you compare the Chinese system to the Singapore system? I know that like in both places, there's a lot of cameras in public spaces, but how does that translate to different realities as a common citizen would experience enforcement if they step out of line?
Nathan, here's the breakdown. China's social credit system is a fragmented regulatory framework with blacklists and red lists, focusing on compliance and trust. Singapore has a strong surveillance and enforcement state, prioritizing public order through laws and fines, but not a nationwide social credit score. Key difference: China integrates reputation and cross-agency penalties, while Singapore emphasizes law-based enforcement with heavy surveillance.
So can you tell me a little bit more about like your last two answers? I'm a little bit confused about, in the sense that you said it wasn't like this sort of, first of all, you said it mostly focuses on organizations. It seemed like you were suggesting that it didn't focus so much on individuals. And you sort of said there's not like this, single unified number for everybody. But then in your second answer there, it sounded a little bit more like that, with red lists and blacklists. Can you give me some like concrete examples of what sorts of consequences an individual might experience for what sorts of transgressions?
Absolutely. Nathan, for individuals in China's system, concrete consequences can include travel restrictions if they're blacklisted by courts, bans on luxury purchases, or limited access to certain services. On the positive side, red lists might offer perks like faster administrative processing. It's not one universal score, but these sector-specific penalties can still affect daily life.
And what sort of thing gets you in that kind of trouble?
Common triggers include failing to repay debts, defying court orders, or committing fraud. In some regions, even smaller infractions like misbehavior on public transportation can lead to warnings or restrictions.
Very interesting. So if you are in debt as an individual, would this be like consumer debt? Like I took out a car loan and I can't repay it, or what sort of failure to repay debt would be sort of a canonical case?
A canonical case would be failing to repay after a court judgment, especially on major loans or financial disputes. That's where enforcement often kicks in, leading to blacklists and restrictions.
So how like oppressive would you say these kind of punishments are? Like it's one thing to say you can't buy luxury goods. That's an interesting punishment.
Right,
But
and it can escalate. For example, individuals might be barred from buying plane or high-speed rail tickets, or their children might be restricted from certain schools. It's targeted, but it can be quite impactful on daily life.
hmm.
And remember,
Does this
it's not just one penalty, but a range of escalating consequences depending on the infraction.
Does this tend to have the effect of like making it very difficult for people to get out of the trap? I mean, you could imagine that like, oh, I can't pay my debt, but now I also can't travel, which means my business opportunities suffer, which means I really can't pay back the debt. We have a version of this obviously in the United States where people like go to jail, then they come out, then they can't get a job, and it's like very difficult to kind of escape the system, so to speak. Would you say the Chinese system has a sort of similar dynamic of like catching people in the system and compounding their problems, or do they have a way that they try to avoid that?
It can compound problems, especially for those stuck in debt-related restrictions. But China's system also offers pathways to restore creditworthiness, like resolving the debt or complying with court orders, to get out of that trap.
Yeah, in theory we do too. I guess it's hard to get it's a big system with a lot of
Exactly.
individual
Nathan,
cases.
it's
Hard
a
to get a real
complex
sense
and
for it.
nuanced landscape, with different outcomes depending on the situation and the region.
Okay, thank you, Q.
You're welcome. Nathan, glad to help.
Pretty good on the voice recognition there for the most part up until that last little bit.
Yeah. The
So
liveness was
tell
not bad
me,
too.
yeah, there were a couple little long chains of thought, but hey, that's I'm known for long pauses too, so I can't knock the AIs for that. Tell me about it. What's the tech under the hood?
So it is using OpenAI's bidirectional, but we can use a bunch of other stuff. I had it using Grok, just before, and what's happening is when we speak, we're getting transcribed by DeepGram, and we're getting. So what ended up happening is we used to transcribe live, in one stream. Now we're transcribing for every person on the stream. We're transcribing separately, and so that manages to give us speaker diarization from the beginning, rather than having to do speaker diarization at the end. So that identifies the speakers, number one. And number two, what happens is every time we speak, before the words get there, there's actually a message that goes out to the OpenAI stream that, hey, Nathan is talking, Prakash is talking, Nathan is talking, Prakash is talking. And then after that, like about 500 milliseconds later, the transcription hits. So Q is getting kind of all of that one after the other. And Q also has a little bit of context on us, and has if we had Q active during a guest, it would have context on the guest as well. And it's basically receiving the same data that the headlines are receiving, and then Q is basically just going for it, right? So every time we call up Q, it starts a new session with the OpenAI bidirectional, and it just goes from there. So and then there's the animations. The animations all keyed to the voice, voice tone, et cetera, et cetera. And that's basically it. It's actually remarkably simple, because most of the work is done obviously by the intelligence, by the API, and it's just us giving enough context. Right now, I think there's still a lot of stuff to iron out, and I'm sure it'll get ironed out in the future. But yeah, we have a voice agent on the stream live anytime. Can do web searches, can answer questions.
That's cool. How does it do with multiplayer? And we were talking about multiplayer, obviously, in
Yeah.
the Claude tag context.
Yeah.
I don't know if you've ever seen this guy. I forget his name, but there's a famous like TikToker or Instagram guy who uses ChatGPT voice mode and just constantly is embarrassing it in all sorts of various ways. And one of the things that it has seemed to struggle with in his examples is a multi-party conversation. Like it's pretty good at kind of one user taking turns back and forth. But do you think, like, how close do you think it is, or do you think it could today actually like participate in an interview with us and actually like try to jump in it in useful ways as opposed to kind of just like clumsily starting up when it shouldn't?
I had really been hoping it was already at that stage, and I'd been expecting it to get to that stage already, and I'm actually a little bit disappointed that it's not. Right now, it's at the stage where it recognizes that there's two people in the conversation. The only way it can tell us apart is the tags which are going in. And it knows enough that it's a 3-person conversation or 4-person conversation. Yes, but it's very hard for it to identify exactly who is who. And I think the labs can obviously do this, but I think they have chosen not to because there are a bunch of things which I think are uncomfortable, and one of those is voice identification. I think voice identification is a very uncomfortable thing for the labs to contemplate because it basically means the AI can identify anyone by voice. And it's probably possible, like the voice imprints, you can probably take a voice signature and match it with like 99.9%. You still get like, in 8 billion people, you're still going to get errors, but in a community of 500,000, you're probably not going to get errors, right? So, and I think they are refraining from the voice ID stuff because they don't want to enter into that yet. And so they're just focusing on this kind of like voice agents that are useful in kind of one-on-one conversations and can be live as much as possible, or for performances, and they're really avoiding everything else. So that's one of the annoying things. The other annoying thing is like I couldn't find a good voice actually. So I went through. They have like 10 or 15 voices. The voices are very scratchy. I think you probably noticed the voice was a little bit scratchy, and I think that's because they are. I don't know whether they purposefully didn't want the voice to sound that good, because after the whole Scarlett Johansson thing, I think they're trying to avoid that kind of thing. So that's part of it. And I think the other part is, I think the way that they are doing the tokens, it's coming out as like a little bit scratchy. And sometimes there's like vast kind of like movements in the voice tone. And there's a bunch of stuff there. So I'm just not, I met the guy who founded Whom. Whom was a emotive voice startup. Their voices sounded like great. I think even the Gemini, the Gemini podcasting notebook LM, I think the voices sound great. This BiDi, the voice doesn't sound that great, but the liveness is there, right? At some points, the liveness was pretty good when it wasn't like thinking. So that's really like the trade-off, I think. It doesn't quite feel alive yet, but you can kind of see a pathway there. It could get there. So
yeah, that's really interesting. So did you try, I mean, for one thing, thinking machines, we got to talk our way into the private beta or whatever of the one that they have, because I think that their whole time centric approach to this probably helps a lot with some of the subtleties of feeling alive and participating in a conversation in a more natural way. So I'll have to ping a couple of people again to see if we can't make that happen. Did you try the Google one though? Because Alan Cohen, who I think is probably who you're talking about from Hume,
Alan Cohen, yeah.
He's now at they kind of did a, like, how many of these do we have now? How many can we name where the founder was hired away but the company wasn't officially acquired? We've obviously had Character that brought Noam back to Google for a bit. We had the original one was Pi, right? That got Mustafa to Microsoft. A similar thing happened with Reka, I think, where the Yite kind of went back to Google. I don't know if there was like a payout there exactly or not. There was the
Scale AI.
Yep, a classic in the genre for sure. Then the which was the coding one? It wasn't Cognition, because Windsurf was the one that Google also did to kind of make their agent thing. Anyway, Hume did kind of a similar thing. So he's now at Google and he's like the lead of their voice work. Did you try the Google one? Do we have any tasting notes on that one?
No. I barely managed to get this operational last night. There's a bunch of, like, because it's participating as a participant in the live stream, right? So there were a bunch of like things to sort out, before I could get it working properly. But yeah, I mean, it's good. It was doing this like auto restart where it's set high every like 2 seconds. So it's an illusion. It's an illusion of intelligence. It's not intelligent. It's an illusion of intelligence. But that illusion is going to get a lot better over time, right? So this is one of the things that we can probably do. We can probably track the progress of these things over time. You can probably also swap out the voices and swap out the underlying intelligence over time. So yeah, it's going to be an interesting experiment. And I think the lead up is to have like an always on assistant at some point. And and it does tool calling pretty okay. So we can probably do something like, hey, Q, can you put this up on the, on screen? And you could probably do that. So tool calling can be done. But everything needs work still. It's still not like automatic. That's the summary.
How hard was it to code, and did you need like Fable class AGI to get it working well, or was it actually pretty easy to integrate the API?
So the first version was our guest greeter. So we have a guest greeter that greets guests when they join, and that was like relatively easy, and that was easy to see and easy to do. And that kind of once that was kind of working, I was like, all right, maybe we can try it inside the live stream itself. And so the live stream was actually like V2 version. And the main problem with our live stream has been the audio. So Fable fixed the audio over the weekend. It redid the entire infra for the audio all the way down to the baseline. And so that was the big bug that got fixed over the weekend. And then once that was fixed, then building this stuff on top gives you confidence that you're not going to lose the main audio. So that's what ended up happening. So it's these deeper architectural bugs that I think Fable is like useful for right now. Like and by the way, I used up a bunch of my tokens early on, like stupidly. So the last 3 days, I've been running Fable, telling Fable to use Sonnet and Codex. And so Fable, probably did like 10% of the work on the first 30% of Fable units, and then did like 90% of the work on the remaining like 70%. Like Fable really maximized Codex use. It was fantastic. So we were talking about how like real AGI should be able to like manage its own compute. Fable can manage its own compute. Fable can decide what makes sense to use and what doesn't make sense to use. And Fable knows how to prompt other AIs like really well. So
did you get into the regime where you're actually paying the API rate? And
no,
This
you
was still
probably never need to do that as long as you structure Fable to use Sonnet and to use other tools. So if you just tell it, hey, I want you to use you're short. I actually told it you're short of quota. I told it like you have 10% quota left, and I have all this work for you. So you have to use Codex and Sonnet. Like you cannot use yourself, and like go for it. So every instruction only takes like maybe like 500 tokens or whatever, and it sends off these agents to do exploration, review. It does this thing called adversarial review, which I have not heard of before, but it does adversarial review of your code where someone purposely tries to break your code. And then once it gets the results, it then parcels that out for solutions. And then it just reviews the solution that, because all it needs to see is like the test pass and that the other agent is creating the proper tests. So for the most part, I think Fable is AGI in the sense that it can use other tools really well. So it can manage its own compute. The whole thing about these labs not being able to like be profitable, Fable can manage its own compute. So it can decide how much compute to allocate to a problem. So. And on that note, I think we have Dan Schwartz. Let me pull up Dan.
Hi, Prakash. Hi, Nathan. Nice to see you again.
Great to see you.
Oh, where'd he go?
Come back.
There we go. It was nice to see you, and now it's nice to see you again.
we still have a little bit of hiccups here and there, Dan. Let me do a quick intro. Our guest today is Dan Schwartz. He's the CEO and co-founder of Future Search, and he's one of the leading figures working to transform artificial intelligence from a conversational chatbot into a rigorous, verifiable system capable of predicting the future. Before founding Future Search, he built Google's internal prediction market, one of the largest corporate prediction markets ever operated, and served as chief technology officer at Metaculus, the internet's premier public forecasting platform. Dan is looking at the long-hyped idea of the AI Superforecaster, and he thinks it has finally crossed the threshold into reality. Using complex multi-agent architectures, Future Search AI is currently matching and in some cases beating top human experts and frontier models on real-world forecasting benchmarks. Furthermore, Dan brings a deeply pragmatic, data-driven view to the AI timeline debate. While others argue purely about theoretical compute scaling, Dan focuses on the verifiable capabilities of models like Claude Fable and Mythos, and how government regulation and commercial incentives are actively reshaping the race to artificial general intelligence. Dan, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thank you, Prakash.
So the occasion for this conversation was this post that just came out from Scott Alexander. I know you guys have collaborated on a couple things over time, but that really caught my eye because, Scott is not, I would say, an uncritical AI hype man. And yet the title of the post is "The AI Superforecasters Are Here." So tell us about it.
Yeah, Scott was actually one of the first people to see the very first AI forecaster. Depends how you define forecaster. Time series forecasting has existed for decades, and AI and machine learning. It all depends how you define those terms. But Future Search was started in 2023. We started building a forecaster before GPT-4 Turbo had even come out. We used Claude 2. It's the very early days. Scott tried our forecaster then and was not super impressed. And I don't think really anybody was back then. But of course, Future Search was founded under the premise that eventually we would get to this superhuman level. And we claim that level has arrived. It's all very sudden. We've been operating this company for about 3 years. And it's really in the last 6 months that these things have started to really scare and impress us in their capabilities. I think the main thing to remark about forecasting is that it's a very important capability, but it is somewhat neglected. You described it as hyped, but really the whole field of forecasting is only about 15 years old. Prior to Tetlock, nobody was even studying accuracy at all. Nobody was recording predictions in a resolvable way and scoring them to give us even the most basic scientific evidence on what was going on. Even before Tetlock, many of us were enthused by prediction markets, but that was a very human technology. Prediction markets are very big right now. As you said, Prakash, I built the one that's currently running at Google. I think that's great. But that's a way of trying to augment and coordinate human intelligence. Of course, we're more interested in artificial intelligence now. And so it's taken a little bit of time. Midjourney was already very good at generating images. I don't know exactly how you would compare image generation, audio generation, writing essays, doing coding, math, all the other capabilities that we normally track. At what point it became human, superhuman, it all depends on how you define it. Forecasting, if anything, is a bit late to the game, but now that it's here, it really changes the nature of what forecasting even is.
You mentioned that in the last 6 months, you have started to see things which are one step up or different from what you were seeing before. Can you elaborate?
Yeah, I think the trouble with this, and a lot of Scott's post was trying to cover the level of evidence because the evidence behind this is a little bit distributed. So the main thing about forecasting that's held it back, and again, this applies to human forecasting as well, is you generally have to wait for the future to happen to figure out if you were right. And with humans, they generally do this in year-long tournaments. And so when the tournament ends, you find out which humans were best 1 year ago. Now, humans don't get that much better over the course of 1 year. So finding out which humans were best 1 year ago is a very good indication of who are the best humans today and how good objectively they are. This does not work with AI. If you wait 1 year and you find out who was good 1 year ago, you're getting a view of something very out of date. So one of the things Scott mentions in his article is that we used our best forecasting to predict stock returns. We published a set of stock rankings in August of 2025. It was basically a simple model for every stock based on forecasting certain fundamentals and extrapolating it out. We put it on the web, we paywalled a bit of it, and then we waited. And now it's been 10 months and that portfolio looks extremely good. But what is that really telling you? It's telling you that our forecasting in that particular methodology was good 10 months ago, which is not something that most people will care about now. So we have a couple different forms of evidence. Some are more short-term. There's tournaments running every couple of weeks, every couple of months. We at Future Search mostly rely on past casting. This is taking a snapshot of the internet from some months ago and using the training window cutoff of models to basically trick them into forecasting without the hindsight bias. This is very useful for us because we can evaluate things immediately. So when Fable came out, the first time the Claude Fable came out, we were able to evaluate it within 24 hours, and it was the best single agent forecaster on our leaderboard. Everyone else had to wait weeks or months to find out how good Claude Fable actually was. So we internally, using the benchmark we call Bench to the Future, saw this progression kind of in real time. The rest of the world is seeing it kind of some months behind. And so if you read Scott's article, you will see that over the last 12 months, the evidence has really come in, and over the last 6 months from these live forecasting tournaments and performance on actual prediction markets, you can see it's at least competitive. AI is competitive with humans and even teams of humans working together. Whether it's better is you got to synthesize a whole bunch of different disparate sources of evidence. I would say if you're curious about this, or if you have forecasting needs in your life, you really should try it. So just go to Future Search. You get $20 free, so you can try some frontier forecasts immediately. And I think you should judge for yourself whether you think they're good.
So what are you guys trying to do with this as a business? I mean, it strikes me that if you can beat the market, you've got a business right there. And it's, potentially a short term. I don't know how durable, of course, the moats will prove to be in a space like this. But one easy way to go, or not easy, but if you have the Superforecaster, an easy way to make a bunch of money is just to play the markets, right? How much are you going to do that versus, sell $20 worth of forecasting to retail versus go to enterprise customers? Like, where do you think the value of forecasting is highest?
Yeah, it's a great question, Nathan. And, Future Search is almost 3 years in, but we're still dabbling our toes in a couple of pies, fingers in pies. So from the trading perspective, it's quite subtle. And you'll see this when you look into Scott's article and look at the evidence. Most money made in financial markets and trading in prediction markets is not based on having a forecasting edge. It's based on any number of other different strategies. The AIs that are making money on Polymarket right now, for example, are mostly doing market making or doing some sort of arbitrage or front-running news or things like that. They're not actually trying to predict the future any better. They're trying to take advantage of certain properties of the markets. Broadly speaking, finance is the same way. There's kind of the Warren Buffett school where if you just predict future cash flows better, you'll make money. And there are plenty of investors that subscribe to that, but the solid majority of investors are not actually trying to predict the future. That's not what they're actually doing. They're trying to take advantage of certain other patterns. So you can ask the question about how are the super forecasting humans making money? If it's so profitable to do this, where was the money coming before AI? It's not like we waited for AI coding agents or AI image generators in order to make money generating images or code. And it's kind of mixed. Various hedge funds have hired super forecasters. Super forecasters I know have worked for them, have set up trading operations. There's a bit of evidence, but it's not really clear that super forecasters can beat the market or how they would beat the market. So the link between forecasting and just making money in finance is not that clear. There is some link, and we have some evidence, and you can see it on markets.futuresearch.ai. Probably the bigger question is, what is the role of forecasting as an AI capability? And here, the main thing you want to track is, what are the frontier labs doing? Now, Prakash, when you introduced me, you saw that or maybe it was Fable who saw, I have a lot of writings of trying to predict what the frontier labs have been up to for some years. In 2024, Future Search, I think, was the first to correctly break down OpenAI's revenue. We were able to figure out where their business was coming from between consumer, enterprise, and API. The reporting at that time had it totally wrong. That was more of a nowcasting than a forecasting. It was basically just being good about uncertainty. Nobody knew the answer to where OpenAI's revenue was coming from in 2024. It's not like they had some report that you could just read. You had to tease it together from dozens of data points and leaks and rumors. That's the task of a forecaster. And so we were able to figure that out. To some degree, trying to predict the future of AI is the most valuable thing you can do with a forecaster. And so we didn't wait until we had AI super forecasting to do it. We've been doing it with humans and human plus AI teams, and now with much more just AI to try to figure out what's going on there. But ultimately, the future belongs to the frontier labs, right, gentlemen? Like what OpenAI, Anthropic, and Google do is largely going to determine the outcomes of humanity from an AI perspective. And so the real question you should be asking is, what do the frontier labs think about forecasting? Are they using forecasting to train their models? Are they interested in that? Is forecasting an important eval instead of data? Do they care how good their models are out of the box at predicting the future? So I'll kind of leave it there, but you can kind of guess where the real money in forecasting is.
So don't leave it there. How would you characterize the companies in terms of their relative positions or outlooks on these forecasts?
I really can't say. I'm NDA'd by a few of the frontier labs. So I think as more time passes, we will learn more about that. Again, the simplest way to think about it is that forecasting is an important AI capability. People haven't been paying as much attention to it as a capability compared to other things like generating images. I think frontier labs are now paying a lot of attention to it, and it has a lot of relevance to kind of the day-to-day operations of the frontier labs. If you think about human forecasting as decision support, what would you guys do if you had a super forecasting human just sitting right next to you that you can ask any question to study any problem? You'd probably get some use out of them. I think it would be somewhat useful, but it's not exactly clear what you would do with them. But now imagine that you had something that was much, much better than the very best humans at predicting outcomes. Imagine that it was good at conditional forecasting. Say, if I have this guest on my podcast, how many views will I get? Versus if I have that guest on my podcast, how many views will I get? If you had something superhuman in that capability and it was available at your fingertips, you might start to think about forecasting differently compared to the previous model of the last 15 years, which is, hire a human, have them spend a couple hours or a couple days, or even put a question on a prediction market and wait for a couple hundred people to all study it. That method of getting information is very slow and is not tailored to your needs. You can imagine what is going on in the back rooms of these frontier labs as they are making their strategic decisions. Another data point that I'll drop for you, which is public, is that OpenAI hired super forecasters to evaluate the GPT-4 release, and then DeepMind hired super forecasters later to look into Gemini. Again, before there was AI super forecasting, there was still a need for decisions about what to do with these models, how to release them, what policies to have. And so the frontier labs did find it in their interest to bring on the super forecasters. Now you can imagine, would they hire those super forecasters again, or would they use the AI that they have in-house or something like Future Search in order to try to make better decisions about what to do with their models and how to prioritize their resources?
So let me kind of ask a question. Sometimes, you have this idea that the LLMs are stochastic pairs. I mean, Gary Marcus, et cetera, would still probably say that. And then on the other hand, you have the idea of, these modern language models as, reasoning engines. And so you have this kind of historical in distribution answers and out of distribution answers, which are basically reasoned to. To what extent do you see, both these aspects when they do forecasts? To what extent are they referring to kind of a historical corpus of things which might have happened? And to what extent are they reasoning through something which has not happened or may not have happened before?
That is a great question, Prakash, because one of the concerns a lot of people have about AI super forecasting is that it's too in distribution. I actually heard this from one of the very best forecasters I've ever had the pleasure of working with in my career. He basically said he believes that a system like Future Search would beat him head to head in a forecasting tournament about kind of near term outcomes of things that are within distribution. But if we were talking about some sort of post AGI world, what world would we be in with transformative AI? He thinks he would have a huge edge over the AIs for exactly the reason that you gave. They are trained to try to predict things that have actually happened. And when things get wonky, you need some kind of creative lateral thinking. I think the rate of AI improvement is so astounding that I think that even the kind of lateral thinking, like trying to imagine a completely different scenario, will fall to the AIs. One unfortunate thing about it is it's hard to test this. So I think the more that AI continues doing strange things to the world, and we wake up and see strange things in the news, and those strange things are meticulous questions and on forecast bench, and teams like mine are trying to predict them better, we will actually get more evidence. But if there is a kind of a step change in the nature of the world, if we enter some sort of AGI, transformative AI type of world, we've got these geniuses in data centers, as people say, or anything like AI 2027 happens, then I think it's kind of going to be Wild West. I will say, I don't think humans are doing particularly great at imagining transformative AI, so the bar is a bit lower. Really, when you play with these AI forecasters, you will find them to be quite human in how they structure their reasoning. And again, this is not an accident. Like, they're trained on how humans have structured their reasoning before. So a human forecaster would love to say, okay, what's the last 10 times something like this happened? What were the outcomes of those 10 times? And now I can make a distribution and say it's probably going to be something like this. The fact that an AI will do that, is it because it independently is arriving at the same conclusion? Is it because it's trained on humans doing that? Is it because it just thinks like a human? I don't think we have answers to any of these questions now. Suffice to say, the superhuman reasoning is something that it's pretty hard to measure. Like, would you know it if you saw it? I guess, Prakash, you were discussing before this using Fable a bunch. I have found that the way that Fable explains things is a little bit alien to the way that I find Opus or GPT-5.5 explaining things. It's very concise, I would say. Like, the sentences are shorter and full of jargon. It feels like it's compressing more information into a sentence than humans normally do. And to me, this is starting to get the Shoggoth is kind of showing from behind the mask. Like, the alien intelligence is a little bit more alien now than it was a month ago. And I don't think it would be a wild prediction to say that we should expect more things like that to happen as post-training is becoming more specialized from the labs, the models are getting larger. So how will this manifest in a super forecasting perspective? Maybe actually super forecasting is the way to look at it. If you're looking at a better code base, you might say, well, John Carmack would have written this. Like, okay, it looks really great, but like a great human would have done this too. But if you look at really brilliantly reasoned strategy about, like, if the administration does this, then what will the outcomes be? You might start to see something that looks a little bit alien to the way that any human has analyzed it. And that might be an indication that the AI is actually starting to really surpass the humans.
In terms of surpassing humans, can you kind of help me calibrate? There's obviously like individual human forecasters or even individual human super forecasters. And then there's like these aggregate measures, right, of the sort of meticulous community or the market clearing price. And sometimes those are maybe manipulated and sometimes they're, subject to other insider biases or whatever, which might make them in fact more accurate. But when we say we now have an AI super forecaster, does that mean it's matching individuals? How close is it coming to our sort of best aggregates of humans?
It's interesting that it's progressed so fast that it seems to have blown through the individual humans and now to the level of teams of expert humans faster than anybody noticed. I'm not super confident on this because, again, we don't have the right experiments. The two easiest sources of data are Forecast Bench from the Forecast Research Institute. If you go to their leaderboards, you will see they have a super forecaster median. And just in the last couple of months, various AI systems, including FutureSearch, are now above the Superforecaster median forecast. The second is the Metaculus Future Eval series of tournaments. They've been running for almost 2 years now. And the AI systems are doing better and better. For a direct head-to-head, Metaculus also runs tournaments that are open to AIs and humans. And they show the responses of AIs compared to what Metaculus calls the community prediction, which is like a slightly more sophisticated median of the forecasters on Metaculus. And that is also showing multiple AI systems that are ahead of the community prediction on Metaculus. Prediction markets are another strange source of evidence, because if you make even a single profitable trade, you are allegedly beating the entire market. FutureSearch has been making hundreds of trades. They're on our website, so you can see them. Our profitability is fluctuating wildly at a low sample size, so it's kind of hard to say. But I think if you see an AI that is not like market making, not arbitraging, but actually just what FutureSearch does. So once a week, we just go to Polymarket and Call Sheet and just pick the markets that we think have the most volume and are most kind of like geopolitical forecasting. Forecast, take the ones where we have the biggest difference and buy and sell. If that's beating the market at all, like even a little bit, that's already the claim basically that an AI system is outperforming an entire crowd of humans who are all working together to produce a price. Again, just to stress, none of those three methods are very credible. Like all of them are fluctuating wildly and have methodological issues. So we don't exactly know, but at least if you just look at them, there are profitable AI traders that are forecasting, and there are AI systems that are beating the two most reputable forecasting benchmarks that people trust.
I'm gonna ask probably like a silly question, but I have to ask it. So DeepSeek, originally the story was that Liang Wenfeng wanted to simulate what consumers would do. And so he built the systems so that he could ask and simulate the market, so to speak, and then that would be useful for the hedge fund. That might be an urban legend, but I have to ask, you must get approached by financial firms all the time. And has this ever been successful, like using models to kind of simulate participants in the market, or in order to kind of figure out how things will happen?
I have only heard about people trying to simulate entire markets. People approach me occasionally with their startup idea of like build an AI prediction market where all of the AI entrants will all bet against each other. And I frequently tell them that is a very inefficient way of producing the best forecast. The reason that works for humans is because humans need incentives. Like if you're going to research and make a bet, like you have to think it's profitable and expectation to do it. AIs don't need incentives. You can just ask it to do stuff and we'll do it as well or as badly, regardless of its financial incentive behind it. I think the deeper question is simply, what have the hedge funds been up to this whole time? Like we know that they've been hiring super forecasters. We know that they all know about Tetlock. What are they doing? And is it making money for them? And I have no idea. Yes, at FutureSearch over the last 3 years, I have spoken to several hedge funds and gotten a little bit of insight into what they're doing. And all I can say is it's quite abstruse. I think every hedge fund is different from every other hedge fund, and they're all extremely secretive. So we basically are just not learning anything about this. If somebody was able to make money in this way, I don't think we would find out about it.
There wouldn't be any signs. I mean, it's an interesting thought experiment. How would we know if somebody did have like a, truly differentiated super forecaster? It sounds like your expectation is, individual hedge funds do well all the time, and there's not really much we could monitor for that would tell us. Is that right?
I'll give you an example to try to say how much I don't think you would really see this in basic indicators. I spoke with a hedge fund a few years ago, which I'll obviously keep anonymous. Their play where they were interested in forecasting was taking breaking news, like things like some drone strike or some oil embargo or something like that, and then trying to trade Bitcoin volatility in the first 300 seconds after that news broke, with the idea being that whenever something risky happens, Bitcoin volatility goes up. And if you can figure out whether that breaking story is actually really disruptive or just like another day and there's nothing interesting going on faster than other people, you can basically go long volatility and then exit, or go short volatility and exit of Bitcoin in the 5 minutes after the news breaks. If people were doing that, would you ever notice, if you looked at Bitcoin volatility, could you see that somebody was executing the strategy? I don't think we would see it. You could even ask a more basic question. How well are LLMs doing in finance? Do we have any idea how useful LLMs are in finance? I think we all assume that they're being used heavily. Do we have any evidence of that? Like, is it profitable? Are people publishing papers on this? I think finance is just kind of a poor place to look for evidence about how technology is diffusing into the workplace, because there's such strong incentives to keep it secret. Whereas if you talk about, like, say, coding agents or something, we're getting tons of evidence because the way to make money is to massively distribute them. So I think we got to look for things where the evidence is. And this is part of why Future Search is a public product that you can go and try right now. Even if we can make more money by selling to one or two firms, I think it's in the interest of the world to just know how good this capability is. And the best way to know that is to have something that you can just use immediately and watch it get better, watch it make mistakes, things like that.
What can you tell us about how you're building the forecasting agent? In the coding world, of course, we have like different models critiquing each other. There's the general vibey sense that like models from different providers have different failure modes, and so they might catch each other's mistakes, and you'll be rewarded for having models from different lineages sort of review one another's work. Of course, there's just the general idea that like spending more tokens, should get you farther. Are you basically following the same trends that are driving coding agents more broadly, or are there particular things that you have found that kind of buck those trends or might surprise people?
I think we are generally following those trends, but I don't think those trends are very well understood. So I will try to answer your question in a way that will be informative for the audience. The very first thing that we figured out building a forecaster in late 2023 with GPT-4 and be like, oh, GPT-4 Turbo is out, now we get to use this thing, is that the main way to get a bad forecast is to get bad information about the present. We were building these kind of just throw more tokens at it to do more web research to try to even understand what on earth is even going on, say with the Ukraine war or with COVID or something like that. And we would get stuck on that point. Like the research agents, I mean, they weren't even agents for a while. They were just like, for loops, or what people used to just kind of the prompt chaining types of things. You could try fine tuning models. There were various techniques that were available back in 2023 and early 2024. But any human expert forecaster looking at them would be like, you clearly have the facts on the ground wrong. So there's just no way you're ever going to get a good forecast out of this. So we started studying what later became known as deep research. And we created a thing called Deep Research Bench, because you have to be able to evaluate getting good deep research on the present before you even have a bat's chance in hell of making a good forecast. And I think one of the things that's really changed in the last, say, 12 months is that getting the facts on the ground right is more of a commodity. It is still not a commodity. I think anyone who's used deep research recently in a field where they're an expert will still see that just getting the basic facts is still beyond the frontier. So a lot of the work of forecasting, I would say more than 80% of the work of forecasting is just doing good research and reasoning on verifiable things about the present. Then once you have that, there's a number of techniques in order to get good forecasts out of them. Future Search is a seed stage startup. So you can imagine we're not training $50 million pre-trained models. You've got your fine tunings and your reinforcement learnings. You've got your agents and multi-agents and various scaffolds. You have the various techniques that anybody downstream of the frontier labs have. Some of the most interesting papers on this are coming out of the Foresight LLM from Lightning Rod Labs. They've actually been doing some reinforcement learning. I think there's another link in Scott Alexander's poster in one of the comments to another group that is doing this. We're starting to learn a little bit about what some of these techniques are. People are actually publishing the results. Future Search put out a paper in April about the strategic reasoning failures in frontier forecasters. We looked at our best forecaster, which is proprietary. We don't share how we do it. And we compared it to just like a very good Opus 4.6 research agent, and then pointed out like stylistically what were the differences, like what was the Opus 4.6 agent getting wrong. The TLDR of that is that frontier models still struggle to model human dynamics as well as an expert human or a better scaffolded forecaster can. So we would find examples where if you took a human forecaster and said, like, is this bill going to pass? The human would say, this president's like top priority is to get this bill to pass. Otherwise, they're never going to be able to like go to this conference, and they have to do this as a face-saving mechanism. And the model would just completely miss that. It wouldn't understand like the deeper motivations behind a politician. And a lot of forecasting is geopolitical forecasting, and a lot of geopolitical forecasting is trying to figure out like what are the true incentives facing all of the players in this like kind of elaborate game theory game that we're all playing. So you can see some of the failure modes in there. That kind of gives you a sense of the frontier on just the research. Like if you can't understand those things about the present very well, that's where you're going to get stuck in forecasting. And then everything about taking the best possible information about the present and turning it into a good forecast in the future, that's mostly Future Research's proprietary edge. So we keep that stuff kind of under wraps. You can also just see the research capabilities are getting good for anybody. Just go to the free tier of Gemini or ChatGPT or Claude. You're already getting research that is like dramatically better than it was a year ago. Pay $20 a month. You're getting close to like expert human level, but still not quite at expert human level for just being able to research what is going on with like an economic or a technology situation.
Let's say, AI forecasting gets really good. How would a consumer use that in their lives? How do you actually make use of this? Because a geopolitical question is not really, whether Iran goes to war or whatnot is not something that the average consumer would have any use for, right? So how would this work out in a consumer product?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think it's been kind of a central paradox of forecasting since Tellock has been studying it, or at least since I got turned on to prediction markets, lurking less wrong forums in 2011. Implicitly, everything that we do is based on conditional forecasts. Like literally every decision that we make has some implicit forecast about the causal outcomes conditioned on whether we take certain actions. Every decision theory that's ever been put in any economics paper has this idea that people are modeling the world and there's some association between the map and the territory, and being able to predict those outcomes is kind of what intelligence really is. Yet people, when given an oracle, struggle to use it. So how can you explain that? With the relatively poor accuracy AI forecaster that we built in late 2023, I put this in front of dozens and dozens of people. A lot of consumers, just smart consumers, but also a lot of middle managers and senior managers at a bunch of different types of businesses. And I was shocked at how they didn't seem to have the imagination to figure out what they should even be forecasting in the first place, despite the fact that they were spending all day making decisions that were implicit forecasts based on what they thought the outcomes of their actions or their teams would be. So this is part of my intuition for why I think forecasting is just a very neglected capability. People don't know how to use it. Whereas, again, compare it to Midjourney or something and say, hey, I've got this AI can generate amazing images. How should I use it? People will also struggle with that one, but it's a lot easier. You can immediately see like 5 or 10 things that you would do with it. People can use it in their personal lives. They can use it in their professional lives. They can have fun with it. They can make money with it. It still requires some imagination. Forecasting, I think, does require people to kind of introspect, like, what decisions am I even making right now? And, I, as the CEO of a seed stage startup, have really benefited from being able to do my own forecasting and have these AIs look at my own decisions and say, conditioned on me doing this or that, what would the outcomes be, and reasoning about that. But I've been studying this for a long time. And even I have to put some effort into it to figure out, what decisions am I even making today? Like, what are the outcomes that I'm tracking? One of the most basic things people get stuck on is, how do you even measure the outcomes? Forecasting generally requires that you stipulate some sort of outcome that you can measure. Are you optimizing over dollars, users, entertainments, like social network? How would you know if you did something that improved your relationship with somebody? And you don't have to specify those things precisely to get value out of an AI forecaster. One of the beautiful things about an AI forecaster is, because it's not being directly incentivized for accuracy when you're using it, it's being trained that way. But when you're using it, you can leave something kind of underspecified and it will give you the same quality answer. It's not saying, oh, well, you didn't define what romantic success is exactly, therefore I can't forecast this. A human forecaster would do that. They would say, unless you tell me exactly what you mean by what outcome are you looking for from this person if you send them this text message, then I can't weigh in on this. An AI can. But I think we're just in the very early days of this, and people will discover more and more ways to get value out of these things, and the people who figure it out first will get a lot of value very quickly before other people catch on.
Going back to the question of how the frontier companies are thinking about forecasting, I know you said that you can't share how they are thinking about it, but I wonder if you could give us some thoughts on how you think they should be thinking about it. Is it complicated? The naive thing would be like, well, it'd probably be helpful if models were good at forecasting, and so they should try to make them accurate, good forecasters. Is there a perhaps, not immediately obvious level of nuance or complication to that idea that you would advise, AI companies take seriously, that maybe they are, maybe they're not? We can leave that to, the audience to fill in the gaps, but what should they be doing from your perspective?
Yeah, so there's kind of 2 questions to this. One is, what should they be doing with forecasting as a capability, and what should they be doing with forecasting as an eval? So forecasting as a capability is kind of a business decision. What does, say, OpenAI care whether ChatGPT is a good forecaster? I think that question is based on whether their consumers care about it as a good forecaster. If you're Anthropic, I think you probably care more about the enterprise case, like when people are using Claude to do white collar work. Do they care how good it is as a forecaster? Are people trying to use Claude to make, say, financial forecasts in an Excel spreadsheet? Is that something they care about? So that's a business decision, and I can't really weigh in on that. I think, again, people will be discovering over time just how important forecasting is in everything, but it's going to be a slow process for humans to notice that, I think. From an eval side, it's very different. Forecasting has this beautiful property that you basically get ground truth by waiting. So if I ask some question about the future, and basically an impossibly hard question, a question that even an AGI, an oracle, a god could never really say because of chaos theory. Imagine just trying to predict, like cubic meter weather 3 weeks in the future. Like, you'd never be able to do it. But if you just wait, then you will see what that weather was in that cubic meter 3 weeks in the future. And so you basically have a completely limitless set of extremely hard, basically impossible questions where you get exact ground truth. And there is no other eval like this. If you want to, say, improve a coding harness, you just need to have more and more hard coding problems that are not in the training data for which you can say this is definitely the correct answer so that you can do some training on it. And that's hard. I think human experts, doctors, lawyers, engineers, financiers, whoever, who are trying to make evals to try to produce data for the frontier labs are finding that they are not smarter than the things being trained anymore. And so if you can produce something that has a correct answer, the model is already going to figure out that correct answer. You need something where there's a correct answer and the model can't figure it out. Forecasting, I think, is the only completely and utterly renewable source of this. Mm-hmm. And again, this kind of is connected to forecasting as the kind of Elon Musk tweet, the quips, the forecasting is like the ultimate measure of intelligence. If you zoom out and think about it in one perspective, it is. Again, I think coding intelligence, AI, R&D intelligence, interpersonal intelligence are pretty darn important. I wouldn't say that forecasting is truly ultimate intelligence, but it is to some degree the ultimate eval. And I think this is something that frontier labs like can and should be paying attention to.
Do you have a sense for how much irreducible chaos there is? Like, in the limit of superintelligence, how much visibility do we get into the future?
Yeah, that is a great question. David Mannheim actually just posted a tweet that has a graph that has a claim to estimate this that I was meaning to dig into because I don't know where those lines are coming from. I would say without evidence behind this, my sense is very Yudkowskian. Like, I think there is a lot of detail in reality that is far beyond the human mind to understand. And as you approach more sophisticated intelligence, you will start seeing a lot of patterns. And then the point of trying to produce, voxel perfect weather 3 weeks in the future is further away than people think. I think there's quite a lot of room. Human superforecasters don't tend to agree with me on this. They basically think that what they're doing is somewhat near optimal, and any sort of accuracy improvements you're going to get over them is going to be tiny and hard to understand. And I think that's just because we only really understand human intelligence. And when you kind of just zoom out from an information theory perspective, from like a Kolmogorov complexity, like just modeling the world as byte strings, the AI overlords will eventually start to figure out stuff that is totally beyond humans to notice. But there's no way to prove this. My sense is that we will start to see it over the next year as the AIs will just get more and more accurate compared to humans in a way that humans don't even really understand. You'll look at the rationales of the forecast. It's like 5 paragraphs of dense reasoning and then a surprising conclusion. And it will just not really make sense, but it'll just turn out to be really accurate. And we will start to understand it less and less as time goes on.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that's related to other modalities? It's something I've been obsessed with for probably the last 2 years is the fact that models are capable of learning a sort of intuitive physics in a lot of different spaces, from protein folding to material science. What's the band gap going to be if we have, this particular super or semiconductor recipe, whatever, right? There's just this sort of strange, the alien nature of these problem spaces from the human sensory perception that models trained on the raw data, or in many cases the simulation data, just seem to overcome. And I'm wondering if you think that's kind of a similar phenomenon where they'll just be sort of pulling the vacuum on reality so tight that they kind of just naturally get it in a way that is maybe not even language mediated, or if you think that those like chain of thoughts are still going to be where the action is. And, you know, I guess when you say like you see these 5 paragraphs of reasoning and then a surprising conclusion, it starts to call into question to me a little bit, like, is the chain of thought really where the action is, or is it kind of, is that sort of a facade or a sort of superficial projection of some sort of deeper sub language understanding or reasoning that might be going on? And obviously, if so, that potentially has, you know, a lot of consequences for the safety plans of the frontier companies, which seem to revolve, you know, mostly around monitoring the chain of thought. So,
yeah,
meandering question, but hopefully you get where I'm trying to go with that.
Yeah, I mean, I think in some sort of trivial sense, that is definitely the case, because if you simply ask a human super forecaster to explain their reasoning, they cannot actually make it fully legible. There is a layer of intuitive judgment that kind of feels like deep learning. They just kind of look at a bunch of evidence the way that a chess grandmaster just looks at a position and just sees the right move. And they cannot explain, it just popped into their head. You know, the grandmaster throws the knight and it just lands on the right square somehow. That happens with humans already. It happens with AI super forecasting systems today. So I think there's just no reason a priori to think that that reasoning would always be legible. There's going to be some layer of intuitive judgment, to the extent that the words intuitive judgment are referring to something going on in a large language model. It just has to be that way. Whether it is very that way or a little bit that way, I think is really your question, Nathan. Like, is it, if I just read the reasoning traces and I read the rationales and I see the research that it did, is it like more or less what a human would have done? I can kind of see where it's coming from. Or is it kind of inscrutable in the way where it just kind of discovers some new pattern in the world that no one has ever seen before, where we get the kind of like psychohistory from Asimov, where there really is like an underlying structure to these things, like some sort of, say, game theory of international politics that it basically just discovers in being trained on forecasting questions, but can't really elucidate. But even in that case, it probably could, it would like write a program saying, hey, like, politics is following these kind of game theoretic properties that are in some obscure textbook nobody's been thinking about. But if you use this, you actually have incredibly high accuracy in predicting these outcomes. And it could just say that, and we could look at it and say, that makes perfect sense. What is the level for which it's doing something for which we cannot follow it down the deep, dark forest into its reasoning? Almost by definition, we can't really know what that would look like. I guess I would say the best evidence is going to come from other domains. So to the extent that the AI 2027 scenario is starting to happen, where AIs are getting better at AI research, is that legible? Are they going to be able to see that? Where, you know, the brilliant AI researcher who works at the company is looking at it, it's like, oh, that's such a good idea. Why didn't I think of that? It's like, okay, it's clearly helpful and very smart, but it is kind of doing something that you maybe could have done if you'd woken up on the other side of the bed. Or is it just going to like write programs full of weird floating numbers that nobody can understand anymore, and then it kind of just goes off to the races? I think we should just look at all of those domains where something like that is happening. Maybe a very salient example is clinical trial prediction. I think a lot of people really want to know how well various drugs are going to do in humans, especially as we get more AI in drug discovery. We can produce many more candidates and synthesize many more compounds. And the bottleneck is obviously being able to run hundreds of thousands of people through it safely and like be able to measure the effects. If you could predict the outcomes of drugs even modestly better, that would be worth many billions of dollars. So what does it look like to predict drug trials? Does it kind of look like a human super forecaster who just kind of reads all the relevant papers and just kind of summarizes it and then just kind of vibes some probability or date or numeric range? Does it look like somebody building like an elaborate software model? Does it look like quantum chemistry, like running 1 trillion experiments of proteins folding into each other? Like, what does it actually look like? If it looks kind of like the human Vibe one, then it looks like the human Vibe one, but maybe something being trained on that task would discover some completely different way of trying to predict clinical trials that all the world's, you know, biologists and pharma executives are completely blind to.
Maybe I'll ask one last question, because we've held you perhaps past the time. Where do you see things in 2029? We've had this 6 months of, you know, crossing the Rubicon, and where do you think? And again, kind of like an unhedged kind of prediction going forward, like 2.5 years, roughly 3 years? Where do you think things end up on the forecasting front in 2029?
Yeah, so Future Search contributed some forecast to AI 2027, and we studied that problem pretty seriously with the evidence of a little bit over a year ago, and we built a model of R&D takeoff speeds under the kind of the core AI 2027 scenario, where the main way things get crazy is that AI is used more in the development of AI. First, by achieving the superhuman coder milestone, and then the superhuman AI researcher milestone. And I am unhappy to report that I think that story is generally correct. I don't know if the timelines are exactly right, but my forecast from that process of leading to something that looks like super intelligence around 2031 is roughly stable. I think the things that have happened in the year since AI 2027 come out very much vindicate the theory that the most important thing going on is how useful is AI in improving the productivity of AI researchers within frontier labs. I've made public predictions that I thought Anthropic was going to run away with it because they had the best feedback loop of talent and actually using their AI internally. I think that has been, n equals 1, but I think it's been totally shown that that's been happening recently. So I think that will continue to happen. So the question is, what is the role of forecasting in this? And you can just imagine what was going on with Dario, with Tom Brown, like going to the White House, trying to get Fable unbanned. What were they doing? What moves did they have, like for the US government, for what it's trying to do? Again, even if you're incredibly cynical and you assume the US government is trying to just kind of score political points, what are those political points and what moves do they have to do it? There's all these kind of intergovernmental organization things and negotiations going on. To what extent is Anthropic, a company that is working on AI, able to use that AI in order to negotiate a better outcome with politicians? That, to me, sounds like a conditional forecasting question. If I go and write this letter, if I propose this export control, if I weaken the model, what is the probability that this person would relent on this thing within the next 3 days or something like that? So I would say, again, we don't have any evidence that that's happening. There may not be any evidence that that's happening, but I think in a model of 2029, whether AI forecasting is helping forecast better decisions that is leading to frontier labs doing things more effectively is very similar to the way that their improved coding is helping them develop AI systems faster and more productively. And that's the thing that I would watch.
Got to assume they're at least talking to Claude a bit along the way.
I am super curious. Anthropic senior leadership, if you're watching this and you want to comment on how useful Claude Fable was in the Claude Fable situation, I'd love to hear it.
I often
paradoxically,
wonder,
they might not have been able to use it.
That's right. That's right.
Prakash, I do have one other question, but
go ahead. Go ahead.
Okay, well, so just a little bit more practical question around, first of all, like, what does it cost to run a forecast? If I go in there as a consumer. Second, if I had a few $1 million to try to invest in creating a public good, how would you think about trying to create a public good with forecasting? Like, we might say, what would be really great is a amazing voter guide to the midterms that says, if this, person gets in and this other person, whatever, then here's, what you can kind of expect, right? Could we help the public make better decisions by giving them some visibility into the consequences of the votes that they might cast, for example? But that's probably a pretty limited idea. I'm interested in farther out ideas for public goods that somebody might be able to provide. And
I'm
then
so
I guess
glad you asked that, Nathan.
Yeah, go for that. I got one more too, actually, but no, that's enough for now. I'll follow up with one other one.
Yeah. So it costs about $1 or $2 to make a frontier forecast. That number can get a lot higher and it can go a little bit lower, but I think that's what you could anchor it. Again, if you just looked at the cost per input and output tokens for an LLM, that gives you like a rough sense of the amount of research that would be done. One of the core questions that Future Search has tackled, again, I described earlier how our main frontier was just doing present day research for quite a while until we got good enough at that we could use it to improve forecasting. One of the questions we asked there was, can you just pour more tokens into a question to get a more accurate answer? Again, it doesn't have to be a forecasting question. If I just ask you, what is the current state of this clinical trial right now? Just give me the most accurate answer to that you can. Can I just pour more tokens into that and get a more accurate answer? Again, this was kind of studied as deep research, writing these like 15-page reports with 700 citations. That was giving you a longer answer. Was it giving you a better answer? It wasn't super clear, which is why we studied this. Forecasting gives us an opportunity to do some world modeling. So Future Search talked about this a little bit at the Manifest conference a couple weeks ago, and the feature in the product is rolling out, I think, literally today. The idea is that once you have a repository of forecasts, every marginal forecast can draw on the implicit world model in those forecasts in order to give you a better answer. Co-founder of Future Search, Lawrence Phillips, wrote this up on Less Wrong a couple months ago, and it was a bit neglected. He basically made the case that as a public good, if you produce this kind of large body of forecasting questions that kind of fed into each other and remain mutually consistent, you could understand the world dramatically better. And the main barrier to that is simply when you put more tokens into your world model, effectively, does it get better or does it get worse? And I think his big insight was around January or February, around Opus 4.6, sometime, or GPT 5.4, somewhere around there, for the very first time, it became possible to put more tokens into like a broad research thing and actually get a better answer, not one that just trails off into nonsense, kind of garbage in, garbage out. And Future Search is doing this in its product. And that's the other reason that we have a consumer product, is because the more people that forecast, the better the forecast will be for them. And then in theory, the better the forecast will be for everybody as we build this deeper implicit model of the world. Now, many companies and research labs have had these ideas of building world models. Again, world model, the way I use that term is maybe misleading. A lot of people talk about like geospatial reasoning, like I'm trying to build a robot hand that can go and pick something up. That's a world model as well. I mean, just a world model of like what is going on in the world that helps me predict outcomes in a very basic way. And the difference with forecasting, well, there's various different things about it, but one thing I'll draw attention to is that the rationale behind a good forecast is a very compressed, brilliant piece of 5 paragraphs. Basically, the things that are most causally relevant to a hard forecast question is like the best summary of information that you could reasonably ever produce. Like every consideration that is going in there is in there because it leads to a different date or number or probability. And so when you start recording 5 paragraphs of the most important things going on with the most important questions, and then scale that to thousands and tens of thousands of questions, et cetera, and then you just read through them and say, what are the latent variables in here? Like, what are the implicit claims going on? Like, why do we think this is this way? Are these consistent with each other? You start to learn a lot in a way where if you just say pre-train on all of Wikipedia, you're just kind of filling up with random uncorrelated facts. But if you have this repository of forecasting research, you might discover some things about the world that you could have never seen by just like asking one question and getting one answer one time. So again, more broadly, I think the big question is, can you just pour more tokens into more research and get better research of any kind? Again, AI research, coding, like whatever, you burn through all of your Fable tokens, Prakash. So if you kind of top up there, can you just like ultra code it and just let it churn? Or what do they call it? What do they say? What do the kids say these days? Let it cook, and just like cook better and better and better as you put more tokens in or not. And then think about it from a forecasting perspective. Could you get to the point where every marginal new forecast improves the accuracy of every single other forecast until you were building a consistent world model? That's what Future Search is after right now. We have some preliminary evals indicating that this does work, and we're rolling it out to our users right now.
What is the structure that ultimately gets instantiated into? Like, are we talking about a graph database? I feel like those kinds of ideas make sense for this sort of thing, but I also could imagine that they might introduce some weird failure modes. And I guess in general, so there's the, how does it get instantiated question? And then this other question that's kind of in the back of my mind. Fun fact about me, I was actually on the Good Judgment team way back in the like DARPA, forecasting challenge, or was it IARPA, for whoever funded that 15 plus years ago. I did well, but not like top tier super forecaster. And at the same time, I also worked briefly at a financial services consulting firm that had done a lot of the financial risk modeling for Fannie Mae. And I don't probably have to tell you how that story turned out, but there was a lot of expert forecasting that was instantiated in this very spreadsheet, kind of causal graph sort of way, right? Where all these, you could literally hit the sort of one visualization button in Excel, and you'd see these like colored arrows, fanning out from cell to cell. And somehow in the end, it was just all totally, totally off. So I do wonder about how you think about like correlated failures as you build out these world models, or if there's any kind of correction mechanism or something to say, wait a second, what happens if we do have some, housing prices never go down nationwide kind of bad assumption lurking in our world model? Is there a way to detect that? Obviously, humans have this problem too, right? The financial crisis proves that. But you can imagine the next one being even way worse, right? Because we're like very reliant on a very small set of AI minds that are, working at it from 1,000 different directions, but they may have kind of somewhat consistent, flaws in their reasoning as they go. Can we protect ourselves against that in any way?
Definitely we can. I will try to answer that both theoretically and with an anecdote. So I tried to world model the Fable situation when it got banned because I wanted it, but also it was kind of a good forecasting question, and there was some nice money trading on Kalshi and Polymarket. And I made exactly the mistake that you're talking about, Nathan. So I ran a bunch of future search forecasts, and I kind of just manually went through them. There was a couple of scenarios, some conditional forecasts. There are basically 33 load-bearing forecasts, basically starting from what even happened? Like, why did the government issue this export control? Was it a simple misunderstanding? Is this political leverage? Is this really about foreigner threat? Is it because Fable is actually dangerous for hacking, et cetera? We didn't know those things, so I kind of put it all together. And when I looked at all of the outcomes, and I talked about it with Claude Code a lot, one thing came out, which is basically every forecast and every scenario I had thought that access would come to Americans first and then foreigners at some later point in the future. And that was wrong. When it came out last week, it came back for everybody. So clearly there was some weight in one of my scenarios that was wrong, but I had basically like kind of a correlated failure in there somewhere. I still haven't completely understood where my reasoning was wrong. It's also possible I just got really unlucky and the outcome we're in was just extremely unlikely. This N=1, you can never know if any one forecast is great. That's one of the hard things about it. But I think I systematically got it wrong by having a bunch of correlated reasoning failures across my various scenarios. So this definitely does happen. Metaculus has a system like this. In the years since I was the CTO there, they have built an actual causal graph platform and product. So you can go to the Metaculus site and click around and you'll find it there. I think the field still generally believes that things like this will work, but nobody has actually made a good one before. And I tried my best over basically 12 to 16 hours of the Fable situation. I think I made a pretty good model. I think I was close to having a very accurate forecast, but I didn't quite get it, I don't think. I don't think those Metaculus models on their website right now are so amazing, but I do fundamentally believe in the approach. As you're saying, Nathan, this has been tried for a long time. When I was the CTO of Metaculus, honestly, it was kind of the dream. It was the holy grail. Can we tie all of these forecasts together into some sort of causal graph? And I think what I can say is that AI makes this tractable. There was just no way that was going to work with a bunch of human economists looking at Freddie Mac or Fannie Mae. I can totally understand why that method didn't work for them then. Whether AI can make it work right now is unclear. Whether AI will make this work in general feels nearly guaranteed. And I don't think Future Search is the only org that is working on this right now.
Well, you've been super generous with your time. We only had a half an hour on the calendar. We've been at it nearly an hour.
Yeah, actually got so bright behind me. I got darker and darker as the conversation went on. Did you guys notice that? I need to
my
fix
lighting is a constant source of, let's say, comedic relief for us, if nothing else. So you're in good company there. Maybe just in closing, sketch out a little bit more of the future as you kind of hope it might unfold. Not necessarily the most likely scenario, because maybe the most likely thing is people act foolishly and don't take advantage of the benefits of forecasting. But like, if we really do a good job, right, and we're interested in truth seeking, and we get the AIs working as well as you think they might, how do you think life kind of feels different?
Yeah. I have to lead with another example of me being a bad forecaster. I guess everyone who tries forecasting thinks they're a bad forecaster because they see things getting wrong. Here's a prediction that I made really strongly 5 or 10 years ago that has basically been totally falsified. I predicted that if we had highly visible, highly liquid prediction markets that were covering all of the major technological and political and economic things going on, that humanity would be wiser and people would make better decisions in government. So here we are. We have Polymarket and Kalshi. I don't see any wisdom or better decisions coming out of all of that gambling going on those platforms. So for me, part of the what is our AI future is trying to understand the present a little bit better. Why is having thriving prediction markets not transforming, say, the news or how people learn information or plan for their futures? Again, one simple answer is that it does. It just takes a while. We're only about a year into prediction markets having, major headlines and being seen by everybody. Maybe it just takes a while for people to change their habits. AIs, if that's the case, can move much faster as AIs get better at forecasting. I guess ultimately, and you said this, Nathan, we're after the epistemics. It's not necessarily just forecasting, predict this outcome. We want models that are reasonable. And one of the beautiful things about forecasting as a human practice is it makes you more epistemically virtuous. The more that you try to forecast and actually write down what you get wrong and do these postmortems, the more it humbles you and it makes you more open-minded. It makes you more of a fox instead of a hedgehog. It just makes you a more reasonable person. And so prediction markets with all these people doing this should be leading to people being more reasonable. Again, I think people aren't doing a whole lot of forecasting on prediction markets. They're doing a lot of trading and a lot of gambling, which are related to forecasting, but not forecasting. If the AIs if they get better at forecasting and they become better epistemically, then we could be in a world where just talking to a chatbot, you are getting something so much wiser and more grounded and more honest about its uncertainty and more poking about you and your own uncertainties as the person talking to the chatbot. And that, I think, could make an absolutely enormous difference. I think, again, putting my kind of cold-blooded forecasting hat back on, I think that the technological outcomes of AGI will come before the cultural change happens. Mm-hmm. So I am very much on the AI safety camp. I really think we should slow things down, give us more time. We should fund more AI safety research and do more policy. Because if we have time for the wisdom of having these alien intelligences around helping us, if we can leverage them and actually make better decisions before the critical decisions get made, there's going to be a series of decisions in the 21st century that we're going to look back on like this decisions made in the 20th century about communism and World War II and the atom bomb and all of those things. Those decisions are coming. Maybe some of them have already been made. Those decisions, as of right now, I don't think are very well informed by very rigorously epistemic, accurate forecasting AIs. But if you just give it another couple of years, we might be in the world where everybody has the sane, grounding, as smart as Kissinger, but actually trying to help and trying to give better outcomes that we can all have. And that could usher us through this crazy phase before the crazy paperclip type of stuff starts to happen. So I feel like I'm racing, from AI forecasting to make it useful and make it help as kind of a broader epistemics and safety process, because otherwise it's just going to get away from all of us. And then a lot of the work we're doing just doesn't matter.
Cool. Well, as my dad would say, good luck. We're all counting on you.
Thanks, Nathan. Yeah, thank you for Koch. Thank you guys for having me. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Dan.
Dan Schwartz from Future Search. Thank you for being with us on AI in the AM.
Bye-bye.
So this makes me think we need to do another round of our prediction market competition between you, me, and this time Future Search. I'll see if we can't get another one spun up. I don't know if they have an API. We'll have to check out the details of exactly how they make their Future Search technology available. But we did it last time just between the two of us, and it came down pretty much neck and neck. I wonder if we pick another dozen or so questions and go at it with the two of us, and then Future Search also to kind of weigh in relative to the market price.
Have a prediction.
If we'll be competitive or not.
Indeed.
Very interesting stuff. Wisdom is indeed in short supply, and I do love the vision of if we just could get a bit more of a clear idea of what it will imply if we do these things, then, should we actually go down that path or not? If we could be better informed, it seems like we could hope to do a much better job at key decision making. So I really do like that.
Indeed.
But whether human decision making is actually so receptive to better context, I guess time will tell. Speaking of time, I understand we're both kind of short on time today. I got to go visit my sister and her new baby, which is very exciting for my family.
Yes.
And I know you got some stuff you got to go do as well. Tomorrow, maybe we can get one of these prediction things going. And I do have an update on Pangram Labs, which we talked about last week as well, and whether or not my writing is becoming more AI over time. I can present that as a graph tomorrow when we get back together.
Sounds good. Bye-bye, Nathan.
Alrighty. Thanks, Prakash.
Cheers.
See you soon.